Charlie Kirk was born on October 14, 1993, in Arlington Heights, Illinois, into a middle-class family with values rooted in hard work, community involvement, and a strong sense of faith. His childhood in the suburbs of Chicago was not one of privilege or extraordinary resources, but it was defined by a household that encouraged him to pay attention to the world around him. His father worked as an architect and his mother cared for the home, and both instilled in him an appreciation for the freedoms and opportunities the United States had to offer. Growing up in an environment that encouraged independent thought, he became attuned at an early age to political discussions that were happening in the country, especially during a time when conservatism and liberalism were clashing more publicly in the wake of wars abroad and the financial challenges of the late 2000s. He was not always the most outspoken student in class, but he paid attention to how teachers framed history, how textbooks explained America's past, and how discussions about the future of the nation could stir strong emotions among his peers. It was during his teenage years that his conservative leanings began to take shape. In high school, he developed a reputation as someone who was not afraid to question conventional wisdom. He would often challenge classmates who took liberal stances and sometimes even engaged his teachers with counterarguments when he felt certain perspectives were being pushed too forcefully. His peers sometimes dismissed him as overly argumentative, while others admired his willingness to stand up for what he believed. Around the same time, he became fascinated by American history, particularly the founding principles of liberty, limited government, and the idea that individuals, not the state, were the key drivers of progress. He absorbed writings and speeches from conservative leaders and commentators, ranging from Ronald Reagan to modern figures like William F. Buckley Jr., and through this reading, his worldview began to crystallize. Though he enrolled briefly at Harper College in Palatine, Illinois, he found himself restless. He was passionate about ideas and change, not lectures and assignments that felt disconnected from the world he wanted to influence. Within a semester he made the bold decision to leave college behind, a choice that many questioned but one he believed was necessary if he was going to dedicate himself fully to building something meaningful. It was during this period, still barely out of his teenage years, that he began to lay the foundations of what would become Turning Point USA. Founded in 2012, Turning Point USA started as a vision of empowering young Americans with conservative ideas and challenging what he perceived as a dominance of liberal orthodoxy on college campuses. Charlie was only 18 when he co-founded the organization, and he threw himself completely into the effort. He traveled extensively, speaking to students at high SCH. As the 2020s progressed, Charlie Kirk found himself at the center of an ever more polarized American political landscape. The country was going through moments of tension that seemed to deepen by the year, from the pandemic to racial protests, from debates about gender and education to the continuing influence of Donald Trump on the Republican Party. Kirk became one of the most outspoken defenders of conservative responses to these issues, using his platform to rally young voters, criticize what he saw as leftist overreach, and present himself as a guardian of American values that he believed were under assault. His role was not merely to comment but to organize, to take abstract political ideas and turn them into movements on campuses, in churches, and online communities. Turning Point USA had by then become a powerhouse, with a network of student chapters stretching across hundreds of schools. Kirk oversaw massive conferences that drew thousands of young conservatives who gathered to hear speeches, attend workshops, and build connections that would extend into careers in politics, activism, and media. He was aware that he was shaping not just momentary debates but potentially entire careers. His events featured prominent Republican figures, influencers, and occasionally Trump himself, who treated Kirk as an ally and an asset in energizing the youth vote. Financially, the organization was thriving. Donors from across the conservative spectrum poured millions into its programs, impressed by Kirk's ability to mobilize the next generation. Alongside this institutional growth, Kirk's own media presence exploded. His daily podcast became a platform where he blended news commentary, religious reflections, and interviews with figures aligned with his cause. His communication style was sharp and unapologetic. He often repeated the line that he was not there to make friends with the political establishment but to expose what he saw as their hypocrisy and failures. Many young conservatives found his voice refreshing, a counterbalance to the dominant narratives they felt surrounded them in schools, workplaces, and online spaces. Critics, however, accused him of spreading misinformation, of fueling division, and of amplifying conspiracy theories. Kirk rarely apologized for his statements, instead using the criticism as evidence that he was shaking the right foundations. By 2021, his marriage to Erika Frantzve was not only a personal milestone but also a symbolic one. Erika, herself a Christian, philanthropist, and entrepreneur, complemented Kirk's image as someone rooted in both faith and family. Together, they began appearing in more public settings as a couple, and later as parents, sharing glimpses of their private life alongside their public advocacy. In 2022, the birth of their first daughter was an event Kirk celebrated publicly, often tying his fatherhood to his sense of mission. He spoke frequently about the kind of country he wanted his children. The silence that followed the gunshot was filled almost instantly by screams, confusion, and the rush of people scrambling for safety. Those nearest to Charlie tried desperately to stop the bleeding, pressing their hands against his neck in hopes of slowing the flow of blood. Medical professionals who were in the crowd rushed forward, but they quickly realized the severity of the injury. The bullet had torn through one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body, where the carotid artery and jugular vein carry life itself in fragile channels just beneath the skin. Within seconds, his pulse was fading. The look on his face told the story: shock, pain, and then an almost instantaneous slipping away into unconsciousness. Despite the frantic efforts, it was clear that the wound was beyond saving. By the time emergency responders arrived, Charlie Kirk was already gone. The news of his death spread faster than the crowd could even be evacuated. Social media erupted in confusion and horror as clips from the event began circulating within minutes. Supporters wept openly, unable to comprehend that a man so young, so full of energy and mission, could be taken so suddenly. Critics, too, even those who had opposed his views with intensity, were shocked that political violence had struck in such a brutal and public way. For the first time in years, the United States saw the assassination of a nationally recognized political figure in front of thousands of people, and the reality sent shockwaves across the nation. Law enforcement quickly identified the shooter as 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson, a young man who had been found hiding not far from the site of the event. Within just over a day, he was taken into custody and charged with multiple counts, including aggravated murder and obstruction of justice. The prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty. Early reports suggested that Robinson's actions were politically motivated, though investigations would continue for months as the nation tried to understand why he had targeted Kirk specifically and why he had chosen that moment. In the eyes of many, there was no clear justification, only senseless violence that ripped apart a family and a movement. As the reality sank in, attention turned to Charlie's family. His wife Erika, now a widow in her early 30s, was suddenly faced with raising their two young children without the man who had built their home and spoken so often about his dedication to family. Supporters flooded them with messages of prayer and sympathy, and within days, memorials sprang up in cities across the country. People left flowers and candles outside Turning Point USA headquarters, outside churches where Kirk had spoken, and even on the campuses where he had held his debates. For his followers, he had been more than a political figure, he had been a symbol of courage, conviction, and youthful defiance. The medical reason behind his death was painfully simple.